Crunch series. It's really become pretty popular. Some of you will have heard some of the initial pieces about the history of this um, before. But we're really pleased to be able to offer these, this series, kind of supported by, promoted by our partner, Document Crunch, who is an organization that we've teamed up with to enhance the services that we've historically provided in contract reviews, and it really takes it to a whole new and important level. And it's just one more piece of what AGC New York State does on behalf of our members to provide them better tools to better manage their business. One thing I will note is that this program on force majeure and supply chain is certainly an important piece, but the previous programs, those have all been recorded and are available. And as we'll talk later on, one in particular, actually the first one on notice will become integral to any discussion on force majeure supply chain issues. And so, as those who have been on previous ones will know, that in the earlier programs, because of the nature of it, I was, a little bit more lead because of New York State specific rules and laws. In this case, I'm going to turn this over to Josh Bell of Document Crunch, and Josh has been on all the programs. I'll let Josh kind of take the lead from here. And Josh, turn it over to you.
Thanks, Joe. Yes, this is, as Joe mentioned, a very hot topic of interest. So what we're going to talk about today, as Joe said, is the force majeure and supply chain issues, but there is related issues, as Joe alluded to, on the notice, to make sure that you are not forfeiting any claim that you would be entitled to. So with that, so the goal of Document Crunch is to empower everyone to understand in the construction industry to understand what's in their contracts, not just lawyers. So we have set out to do that, and I will touch on a couple of things today that will outline kind of what's in standard contracts like AIA and consensus docs, and some other things in your custom contracts that we are, our tool is programmed to find. And we will go through those and provide some sort of like best practices and things to look out for. So the first one is on AIA. So AIA standard they don't call it force majeure, but this is basically what it the provision that deals with that topic is 8.3, 8.3.1, 8.3 as a whole. But I want to point out here that if you notice in the standard 8.3.1 language, it doesn't say anything about like pandemics or anything like that. And I think contractors can be lulled to sleep a little bit by the beyond causes beyond the contractor's control. Well, that's good, but that has been interpreted to mean if you have created the general bucket before that, then you're good, meaning that if there's a tsunami and you didn't say anything about weather delays or act of God in your acts of God, like in your laundry list of things, you may forfeit that claim. Also, I want to point out 8.3.1 says you are entitled to time. 8.3.3 says it doesn't preclude a claim for money. So that's something to be aware of too, is to say, and a lot of times, and that what I have seen is owner custom contracts will say you are entitled to time, but not money. So there are some other things too I want to point out is that, well, I'll go on to what consensus doc says. Oops, sorry. Um, consensus doc says you are entitled to both time and money. And also they do have a laundry list of a more expansive laundry list of things that would be like general force majeure type of things. They do actually say something about epidemics, not pandemics. There is a difference between those two things, where epidemics are like a regional type of thing versus pandemics more global. And 632 actually says that you are entitled to money. So one thing to watch out for, I would say this is not the norm. And the reason for that is that owners don't want to give a blank check, so to speak, to say, okay, and also the owners, the trend is that they expect contractors to have figured it out a little bit by now, because we have been dealing with it for COVID for so long. And while that's true, there are things that are outside of your control, like material price escalation. I mean, it's really hard to predict that stuff because, if the price escalates, then that should be, an adjustment to the contract price. So also, I would say there are two elements. It's not only the price, but the availability. So if the owner specs a certain thing and they don't accept an alternate or something like that, then in my view, they should take on the risk of that taking an extended period of time or being more expensive.
A couple of things just to add to what Josh was saying. One of the things that I'm noting here and there from time to time in documents, owners trying to put these in, that limits the ability of a contractor to be compensated for epidemics and pandemics, and oftentimes specifically noting COVID-19. And I think there's a difference between what is reasonably anticipated. So you may be able to anticipate, the COVID-19 situation as is currently in place. But if all of a sudden it's out of control again, and you have government mandated shutdowns, additional government mandated rules that were not anticipatable, I think that is and should be, a completely different matter. I'm also taken by, in the consensus docs language, and actually, with the term terrorism. Josh, why don't you go back one slide, just to the AIA document, right? So unusual delay in deliveries. And I want to kind of combine those two. It's my understanding that electrical switchgear is a major issue. Deliveries, 50 to 70 weeks out. And one of the reasons for that, from what I'm hearing, is there is a particular bit of material as part of the electrical switchgear that is produced in Ukraine. One, I would say that's an unusual delay in delivery. And if you go back to the next slide on consensus docs, I think that there's a strong argument to be made that it is the result of terrorism by Russia, so I think it's an interesting way to look at it. And also in the consensus docs, back to the COVID, you also look at adverse governmental actions. I could put a lot of things in that bucket of adverse government actions to include COVID-related restrictions, to include restrictions of getting lumber over the border from Canada, to include even additional tariffs. And I think there's probably language about change in law in some contracts that I've seen. I don't see it in AIA documents. But if there's additional tariffs and other restrictions there, then I think those certainly are ones that would fit into the consensus docs 6.3.1. It may be a little bit more difficult on the AIA document, but I don't think impossible when you look at that broad language. I don't know, Josh, what do you think on the broad language? You think we could fit some of those into those things that are not anticipatable by the contractor?
Yes, that's one that I would, I revised the A201 to say, to your point, Joe, about like changes in the law, to address that in a different section where they talk about applicable law, and basically to say applicable law as it is the day we sign the agreement, for one. And the other one is I would revise this AIA 831 to me more sort of comprehensive, including some different things that you can't really control. And that's a great point, is like, that's another place that is potentially problematic, is the not reasonably foreseeable or anticipated. Well, at this point, COVID is obviously reasonably foreseeable and anticipated. So when all of this started in 2020, it's like, okay, well, the contracts we signed before that, there's no way you could have anticipated that. It could be argued, to your point, Joe, is that after that, you can anticipate. So I would just beware of that. So that's one thing I would certainly, I myself tried to remove, to say, because of the nature of it and kind of ongoing nature of it. The other thing I wanted to point out too is that to watch out for is like a no damages for delay clause, saying you do not get money under any circumstances, or a concurrent delay clause that say, even if you're 1% responsible for the delay, that knocks out the entire claim. So I would watch out for those. And if I see those, I would, I would say to make it like, to the extent, or something like that, that the delay is caused by the contractor, they can't make a claim for it.
Yeah, and a lot of folks will recognize, particularly on public work, it's rare if they're used in the AIA document that I don't see the 8.3.3 modified to specifically preclude recovery of damages for delay. And I, two things, on that, I regularly point out that, there is, some argument to be made on case law that would preclude owner actions, but not necessarily unanticipated conditions. But even that, could be argued if you look at the Savetta case, that those things that are so far beyond the pale that you can get recovery for damages for delay. But I would also suggest, and for whatever reason it's worked, I've always looked at damages for delay as consequential damages as opposed to direct impact costs. And so I would caution, as I've cautioned before, do not use the term damages for delay or delay damages when you're looking for any direct costs that impact the project, and look for impact costs, particularly where you've got any degree of owner or unforeseen circumstance that has caused the delay situation. And then you can kind of maybe look at at the change order provisions as to what kind of things you can get compensated for. It's not foolproof, but I've seen it work.
That's a great point, Joe. I was just curious, like, how do you see the waiver of consequential damages, like the interplay there with, like, if those are potentially consequential in nature?
Well, I always look at consequential damages are things that are beyond the bounds of the contractual work, right? So from an owner standpoint, the consequential damage of not opening a hotel on time is loss of revenue, right?
Right.
Whereas a direct cost, I've always looked at it, and others may argue against that. I always looked at it as direct damages are costs of additional time from the designer on the job, additional
Right.
time for an owner's rep, any of those direct costs. In the same fashion, consequential for a contractor is loss of revenue, loss of future work, those types of things, as opposed to, I actually have to have a trailer on site or a crane on site for an additional month or 2 months or whatever it may be. I need additional supervision for that time, and those direct costs that are attributable to that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. One thing I have seen on some owner contracts, either there is a specific contingency for COVID related claims, or if there is material price escalation, which we'll address next, that it's kind of a shared thing that says, okay, well, the first 10 up to 10%, that is on the GC, and then the owner will pick up anything over that. Or there are different ways to deal with it, but I've seen that in some contracts. So where document crunch comes into play here is that our tool is going to identify any of those provisions dealing with delay. We actually provide the numbers you see on the left-hand side of 12, 13, 25 are going to take you right to those provisions. And the DC you see on the right-hand side is what we found. We have added the ability to, if you want to add like tags or something you view as relevant, you can do that. So that is a helpful way to quickly identify like what those provisions are, because honestly, like sneaky lawyers like myself will hide it somewhere and put it somewhere where it's not supposed to be. So we will find that. And also, I often say, like, what is not in the contract is often as important as what is. So if it's not there, we actually tag, say, not found. And so it's going to identify it's not there, and it should be.
The other thing, just to Josh, to add to that, just for those who have not heard this before, the partnership, with AGC New York State, is that there will also be commentary from our standpoint on specific issues related to New York State items, things that we've run into, and certainly that was a lot more prevalent on issues of payment, but even here there would be a comment about the Savetta matter, as well as the issue of impact costs versus delay damage.
Yes, thank you, Joe. I had forgotten to mention that. Yes, we provide rationale insights, and that has been customized for New York AGC. So yes, thank you for reminding me of that. And then the next thing is what we call a project team cheat sheet. And so guys like me care about what it says about indemnity and waiver of jury trial, stuff like that. project teams don't need to know that stuff. They need to know, like, okay, like, notice that we were talking about earlier, like, where do I set my notice and how do I set it? And like any claims that I have available, stuff like that. So we have provided just those things that we view as necessary for the project teams to know, and excluded all the stuff from the comprehensive review that that we presume are not really relevant to the project teams. However, we do provide that comprehensive, so if you do want to know that stuff, it's available. So I picked a couple of material price escalation clauses that I thought were pretty good, and ones that I've seen. So this is basically saying, okay, if there is a material price escalation, you get to get money without profit and overhead for that escalation. The other thing I would do is say the availability thing, to say that if there is not an alternative that the owner is willing to accept, then you also get time for that. And that additional time is absorbed by the owner. So that's, I mentioned there was another one too, kind of a similar thing that says that basically contractor is going to do the best it can, but that, you know, there are things that are simply not foreseeable. So the contract price would get adjusted for that.
You know, one thing that I would point out, and if folks want a copy of it, let me know. Consensus Docs has come up with a rider, 200.1 language actually can be added to any that focuses a little bit more on a negotiation for the materials that you are most concerned about. For example, you know, it will look at issues of all right, what does extraordinary increases or decreases mean? Over what percentage? What percentage might you have anticipated reasonably when you set forth your price or GMP versus, you know, where does it go? And then what's the proof? Well, you know, usually it's something like the producer price index, you know, and some other proof in that regard. And as it's pointed out here, it looks at both increases and decreases.
Right.
We think that that's an important piece of it. Yesterday, we've met with the state. We will continue to do so. Unfortunately, our material price escalation bill was vetoed by the governor. We're hoping that it's because it was not part of the budget, and we're going to work hard to get it in the budget for 2023. But we also have to look at what are we going to do with the agencies, whether by legislation or by mutual agreement, to begin to index materials or look at some way to cover that the volatility going forward. I would also note that in the 200.1, it also covers issues related to supply chain disruptions and the time impact issues that go along with that.
So that's Joe, that particular piece of legislation you were talking about, is that pegged to like a certain index, pricing index or something?
Yeah, it's pegged to the producer price index or some other objective metrics that's out there, most commonly the PPI. And it follows something that we did back in 2004, right after the unusual steel price spikes that occurred in the marketplace, and we got that into the budget then. You know, obviously our problem here, besides the fact that it wasn't part of the budget as in 2004, is it was perhaps overbroad. You know, it covered everything and anything, and we may need to look at honing that down into some specific materials and issues. But that's something that we're going to look at. But discussions are just beginning as we go into the budget season for this coming year. And that's just state contracts, right? So it's not looking at private work. It's not looking at local government work as well.
Gotcha. Okay. So
one thing that I will note as we go into a little bit of, back to the relationship, is that you should have a Q&A tab. If you've got any questions, please type them in, and we'll try and get to those before we break today. But if we don't get to them before we break today, we will get back to you with an answer one way or the other. So we'll give you a couple minutes to do that if you have any questions. Josh, you want to talk about the AGC document crunch? We've touched on it a little bit, but this is a little bit more on the product.
Yeah. So the document crunch and AGC New York relationship is to provide you with the tool to find these things basically in contracts. And so I would emphasize the importance of like addressing them on the front end, kind of that ounce of prevention motto. It's like, okay, well, so you can quickly identify what the other thing I want to talk about is on the order of precedence. So sorry if I'm kind of all over the place there, but I think a lot of contractors may stick a provision in like their quals or something like that. I would say just be aware that that could get knocked out by the order of precedence, meaning if there is a conflict that one document says one thing and another says another, that will trump basically what is said in your quals. So just be aware of that. To say that even without an order of precedence clause, I think it's best practice to sort of harmonize those things. You don't want your main contract saying one thing and your qual saying another. So I would just address these things on the front end. And what we have done is provided a tool for you to be able to identify those quickly. So if you can see like kind of the provisions that need to be revised or something like that are inconsistent with your proposal and are inconsistent with your qualifications and clarification. So I would just say we also identified like the order of precedence that I was talking about is one of the many things that we would identify that would basically provide you with a hyperlink so you can see exactly what the contract says on that stuff, as well as anything related to delays or compensation as a result of that.
So, as we look at, I mentioned before the teaming up with document crunch, and there are two pieces to it that are important. One, document crunch is a national product, a national program, and we worked out an arrangement to where, as I said before, we add in the New York State perspective that is very, very important. It brings in, our historical approach to looking at contracts, but it looks at it from two standpoints. One that Josh mentioned is the project manager cheat sheet. To know what you're up against, to know those key provisions that are out there that could impact you going forward, and to know those going in, but also from a situation of you're on a private job, not a contract of adhesion, as I like to say, and you have the ability, to at quite a discount, frankly, in the arrangement we made with Document Crunch, to get a review of that document that the owner has put in front of you, to see where are some of the danger areas, where are some of the things that we might want to try and renegotiate. As an example, Josh showed you a couple of the consensus docs clauses. Well, you may not be dealing with a consensus docs document, but there's language there that while we think it's best to use the consensus docs, you may not have that option, but at least you can use that language as a tool to assist in negotiating the agreement. Josh, did I miss anything?
I was just going to say that back to what I said at the outset is that the goal of Document Crunch, or the mission, is to simplify our contracts for everyone. So all project teams can understand what's in their contract. So that is the main goal. As Joe mentioned, we're available. Our team is available to you whenever you need help. So we are committed to this mission. So that's one thing. Is just the other thing is that we have made it so that it's unlimited crunches, meaning there might be a lot of back and forth. So each iteration of that negotiation, you can crunch that. You can say, okay, version 1, it was one thing, version 2, 3, 4, whatever is something else. So you can crunch each one and see how it's changed and see how that's progressing. On the last one is just a QR code. If you want a demo of our product, that it's very simple, very easy to use, and you can get going with it right away. So like Joe had mentioned, if you have any questions or anything for us after the fact, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, and Josh, I don't see any Q&A, written down, but we look forward to seeing you at the next one. And Brendan, I'm drawing a blank. What's the next program? It's always the third Wednesday of the month at 12:15.
Yep. Let me just, I'm double checking the. Sorry, next title is the liquidated damages.
Liquidated damages, which is
February 5th.
Very interesting topic.
Yep.
Goes a little bit related to some things we talked about today. So hopefully we'll see you in the program next month. Again, third Wednesday of every month, 12:15, and look forward to seeing you in the next version. And don't forget, you can access the recordings of these on the AGC website. This one will be available.
Sorry, Joe. I forgot to mention, we are going to publish blog posts to coincide with these topics. So if you want to know more, we will have blog posts available on our site.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. We'll have a great rest of the day. And again, we'll look forward to seeing you the next one.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.